She was the mother of the woman he almost married. She was 50 years old, soaking wet, and standing on his porch at 11 o'clock at night with mascara running down her face like she had nowhere left in the world to go. He was 32, raising a 6-year-old daughter alone, and the last person on earth who should have opened that door. He opened it anyway. What happened next would cost them both everything. Her daughter's forgiveness, his carefully rebuilt peace, and every wall either of them had spent years constructing around a feeling neither one had ever dared to name. This is the story of two people who found each other at exactly the wrong moment, and why it turned out to be the only right one. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now, drop your city in the comments below, and let me see just how far this story has traveled. Now settle in. This one's going to take a while. The storm came in from the northwest sometime around 9, the kind of October weather that didn't bother announcing itself. One minute the sky was just dark and overcast the way it had been all day, and the next the rain was hammering the gutters and the wind was pushing so hard against the workshop windows that Landon Pierce had to wedge a 2x4 against the back door to keep it from banging open every 40 seconds. He didn't mind the storm. He actually preferred working through them. There was something about the noise of it, the rain and the wind and the occasional low groan of the oak tree in the side yard, that felt like company without the obligation of conversation. He'd had enough conversation that day. His supplier had called to say the white oak order was delayed another 2 weeks, which meant the dining table for the Hendersons was going to be late, which meant a phone call he'd been putting off was now officially unavoidable. He'd made it, kept it professional, and then stood in his workshop for a while afterward, just running his hand along a piece of walnut he'd been shaping all week, not really doing anything, just feeling the grain under his palm until his breathing slowed back down. That was 6 hours ago. It was past 11 now. Landon was at his workbench sanding the drawer fronts for a credenza someone in the city had commissioned. Custom hardware, dovetail joints, the works, and Macy was upstairs asleep, which was the arrangement most nights. She went to bed at 8:30. He worked until midnight, sometimes later. The house was quiet except for the storm and the soft scrape of sandpaper and the occasional pop from the wood stove he'd fired up around 7 when the temperature dropped. He almost didn't hear the knock. It was quiet. 3 taps, barely audible over the rain. He stopped sanding and waited, thinking he'd imagined it. Then it came again. 4 this time, a little harder, like whoever was on the other side of the door had worked up the nerve. He set down the sandpaper, wiped his hands on the front of his jeans, and walked through the workshop into the mudroom and then into the front hallway. He flipped on the porch light and opened the door. Victoria Sterling was standing on his porch. His first thought, and he wasn't proud of it, was that something had happened to Kara. His brain went there fast, the way it always did when something unexpected landed on his doorstep at 11 at night. Kara, his former fiancée, Victoria's daughter, the woman he'd almost married 6 years ago before the whole thing came apart, the way young engagements sometimes did when two people realize, just a little too late, that love and compatibility are not the same thing. But then he actually looked at Victoria and realized this wasn't that kind of visit. She was soaked. Her coat, a good one, charcoal wool, the kind of coat that cost real money, was dark with rain and clinging to her shoulders. Her hair, which he'd only ever seen pulled back and polished and deliberately composed, was loose and wet and plastered against the side of her face. She was holding her purse against her chest with both arms, the way a person holds something when they're not sure they're welcome and aren't ready to put it down. And her eyes were a wreck. She hadn't been crying recently. It was more like she'd been crying for a while and had stopped because she'd run out of the ability to continue, and what was left was this hollowed-out stillness that was somehow worse. Her mascara had tracked down both cheeks, and she hadn't wiped it away, which told him something. Victoria Sterling was not a woman who left things unattended on her face. He'd been to enough Sterling family dinners to know that. "Victoria," he said, and his voice came out quieter than he intended. She looked at him. "I'm sorry," she said. I know. He stepped back from the door. "Come inside." "Landon, you're soaked. Come inside." She hesitated another second, and then she stepped over the threshold and into his front hallway, and he closed the door behind her, and the storm noise dropped by half. He got her a towel from the bathroom closet and a dry sweatshirt that was 3 sizes too big, and then put the kettle on while she changed in the downstairs bathroom. He stood in his kitchen and looked at his hands for a moment, the wood dust still in the creases of his knuckles, and tried to figure out what he was feeling. Surprised was the obvious one. Victoria Sterling had never come to his house. Not once. Not in the years he'd been engaged to Kara. Not at any point during the long, slow deterioration of that relationship. Not after. She'd been cordial to him always. And there had been moments, dinners, and holidays when he thought that she actually liked him, genuinely, beyond the polite performance most future mothers-in-law maintain. But she'd never sought him out. She had always maintained a careful, appropriate distance. He was also feeling something else he couldn't quite name, something that sat uneasy in his chest the way a piece of wood sits when you set it on the bench wrong and the grain runs counter to what you were expecting. She came out of the bathroom in the sweatshirt and her own dark trousers, still damp at the hems, and she'd wiped her face clean. She looked different without the mascara. Younger and also more tired at the same time, if that was possible. "Sit down," he said, nodding toward the kitchen table. She sat. He made the tea, plain black. He didn't ask. He just made it, and set the mug in front of her and sat down across the table. "How long were you out in that?" he asked. "I don't know, maybe 20 minutes. My car is at the bottom of your road. The driveway was dark and I wasn't sure." She stopped. "I walked up. In October." "In October," she agreed. She wrapped both hands around the mug. "I should have called." "Yeah, probably." He wasn't trying to be unkind. He was just being honest the way he usually was. "What happened?" She looked at the table. "I was at Kara's." He waited. "She said something to me tonight. Several things, actually. Things she's apparently been thinking for a long time." Victoria's voice was level, but there was something underneath it, a vibration, like a board that looks stable but flexes when you put weight on it. "She asked me to leave, her house. She meant it." Landon was quiet for a moment. "What did she say to you?" Victoria looked up. Her eyes were steady now, not wet, but there was something in them he recognized. He'd seen it in the mirror often enough after Kara left. The look of a person who has just been told the truth about themselves from a direction they weren't expecting it to come from, and who isn't sure yet whether to be angry about it or simply accept that it's true. "She said I was never present," Victoria said. "That even when I was physically in the room, I was never actually there. She said she'd spent her whole childhood competing for my attention with a company I built and a marriage that stopped functioning 15 years ago." She paused. "She's probably right about most of it. What was the rest of it?" Victoria set down the mug. She looked at him with a directness that reminded him why she ran a company with 300 employees at 50 years old. Victoria Sterling, whatever was happening to her tonight, did not become a different person. "She told me," Victoria said carefully, "that the reason I was never fully present with anyone in my life, her father, anyone, was because I'd been carrying something I was too proud and too guilty to look at directly." She paused. "She said she'd watched me for years, that she'd seen something I apparently didn't realize was visible." Landon's hands were flat on the table. "What did she say she saw?" "She said I was in love with you." Victoria said it without flinching. "Have been. Since before the wedding that didn't happen. She said she always knew it, and she said it was part of why she ended things with you, because she couldn't stand the idea of marrying someone her mother—" She stopped. She used harsher language. I'm editing." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the storm was still going, rain against the windows, wind through the oak tree. Landon didn't say anything for a long moment. "Is she right?" he finally said. Victoria looked at him. "I came here tonight, Landon, at 11 o'clock in the rain." She tilted her head slightly. "What do you think?" "But the thing about Victoria Sterling, the thing Landon had always known about her even from the beginning, even when she was just Kara's mother, who showed up at Sunday dinners in blazers and asked him about his business plan with the kind of genuine curiosity that most people reserve for things they actually care about. The thing about her was that she was real. That sounds simple. It wasn't. He'd grown up around people who performed versions of themselves for other people's benefit. His own father, a decent enough man in theory, had spent 30 years being the gregarious, backslapping version of himself at every family gathering, and then coming home and sitting in silence in the garage for 2 hours before he could function like a normal person again. Landon had watched that and decided early that he didn't have the energy for it. What he had was what he had, and people could take it or leave it. He'd thought Kara was the same way. She was sharp and funny, and she said what she meant, or what he'd thought was what she meant. It had taken him a while to understand that Kara said what she meant in the moment, but her moments were highly variable and frequently revised. Victoria, though. Victoria said what she meant, and she meant it the same way the next day and the day after that. He'd noticed that from the beginning. The way she listened to him when he talked about the business, not just nodding, but actually listening, asking follow-up questions 6 weeks later about things he'd mentioned in passing. The way she looked at the furniture pieces he brought to her house for the guest room, running her hand along the joints the way his best customers did, the ones who understood what they were paying for. The way she treated the waitstaff at restaurants, not with performance, just with basic consistent courtesy, which was apparently a higher bar than it sounded. He'd noticed it and filed it away, the way you do with things that aren't yours to keep. He wasn't stupid. He'd known there was something, some quality of attention that existed between them that was different from the ordinary warmth between a man and his future mother-in-law. He'd chosen not to examine it because examining it would have required him to be honest with himself about something that was not acceptable to be honest about, given the circumstances. And then the wedding had been called off, and Kara had moved on with surprising speed, and Landon had gone home to his half-finished house and his 6-month-old daughter, and had rebuilt his life piece by piece until it looked something like stability, and he'd put everything else in a box in the back of his mind and gotten on with things. "I think," he said slowly, "that there are probably some things I should be honest about, too." Victoria looked at him, not eager, not anxious, just steady. I thought a lot of you," he said, which was not the most articulate thing he'd ever said in his life. "Not in a way I acted on. Not in a way I thought about acting on. But yeah." He stopped. "You were never just Kara's mother to me. You were a person I genuinely respected, and I think that went beyond what was normal. What does that mean to you?" "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "I need to think about it." She nodded once. She wasn't pushing. That was the thing about her that kept surprising him. She didn't push. Most people, when they came to someone with something that vulnerable, needed you to meet them at a certain distance in a certain amount of time. Victoria had walked in the door and handed him the most exposed thing she had, and then sat back and waited without expectation. "You can stay tonight," he said. "The guest room is fine. In the morning we can figure out. I don't want to put you—" "Victoria." He looked at her. "You walked up my driveway in the dark in October without a flashlight because you didn't know if you were welcome. You can stay." She was quiet for a moment. Then something happened to her face. Not dramatic, not the kind of thing you'd notice if you weren't looking for it. A small, careful loosening. Like someone who'd been holding their shoulders up for a very long time and was allowing them, just slightly, to come down. "Thank you," she said. Macy found her the next morning. This was, under the circumstances, probably the least complicated part of the whole situation, which said something. Landon's daughter was 6 years old and had her mother's dark hair and her father's habit of walking directly toward whatever interested her without any preliminary social calibration. She came downstairs at 7:15, which was late for her, and found a woman she'd never seen before sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and Landon's laptop open in front of her, typing something with the focused efficiency of someone who was constitutionally incapable of not working even on the morning after her life had temporarily fallen apart. Macy stopped in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the woman. The woman looked up from the laptop and looked at Macy. "Hi," Macy said. "Good morning," Victoria said. "Who are you?" "My name is Victoria. I'm a friend of your dad's." She paused. "He's in the workshop. He said to tell you he'll be in for breakfast in 10 minutes. Macy considered this. She was a child who had grown up with a father who was direct and honest with her in ways that other parents found occasionally alarming, and she'd inherited that as a default mode of engagement with the world. "You slept here?" she asked. "I did. In the guest room?" "Yes." "My dad has a rule about the guest room," Macy said. "He says we only put people in there if we actually want them to stay." Victoria's expression shifted slightly. There was something in it that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite sadness, and was probably a mixture of both. "That's a good rule," she said. "Are you going to have breakfast with us?" Victoria looked at the door, then back at the child. "If that's okay with you." Macy thought about it for approximately 2 seconds with the gravity of a small person who takes hospitality seriously. "It's okay with me," she decided, and walked to the cabinet and got down her own cereal bowl. Landon came in from the workshop exactly when he said he would, which was a thing Macy had come to rely on so completely that she barely looked up when the back door opened. He stamped the wet off his boots and hung up his jacket and then walked into the kitchen and stopped. Macy was at the table eating cereal. Victoria was still at the other end with her coffee, the laptop closed now, and the two of them were in the middle of a conversation about something that he caught the tail end of. "But if you sand against the grain, it comes out rough," Macy was saying with the authority of a child who has spent considerable time in a woodworking shop. "Dad says the grain always tells you which direction to go." "That's true of a lot of things," Victoria said, and looked up and saw Landon in the doorway. There was a beat between them, the particular beat of two people who have said things to each other in the dark that they haven't yet figured out what to do with in the daylight. "Morning?" he said. "Morning," she said. Macy looked back and forth between them with the bright, unfiltered observation of a 6-year-old. "She's staying for breakfast," she informed her father. "Good," Landon said, and went to the stove. Start. They ate together at the table with the October morning outside the windows. The storm had cleared and left behind the washed clean kind of Saturday that felt like a statement about something, all pale light and wet leaves on the driveway and the smell of cold air when he cracked the window over the sink. Macy talked a lot. She was a talker, always had been, and she directed most of it at Victoria with the particular intensity of a child who has decided a new adult is interesting and worth investigating thoroughly. Victoria answered everything, honestly, without condescension, without the performance of enthusiasm that adults sometimes deployed around children as a substitute for genuine engagement. She told Macy that she ran a company that made medical imaging software. Macy wanted to know what imaging meant. Victoria explained it without simplifying it beyond the point of accuracy. Macy absorbed this and moved on to asking whether the people who worked for Victoria liked working for her. Landon watched Victoria think about that question. "Some of them do," Victoria said. "Some of them find me difficult." "Why?" "Because I have high standards and I'm not always patient." Macy nodded seriously. "Dad's like that too. He says if you do something halfway, you didn't really do it." "He's right." "Are you going to come back?" Macy asked. Landon turned slightly from the stove and looked at his daughter. "Macy," he said. "What?" "I'm asking." Victoria looked at Landon, not performing casualness, not trying to deflect, just looking at him with the directness that was the most consistent thing about her. "I hope so," Victoria said. After breakfast, Macy went upstairs to get dressed, and then out to the backyard to do whatever 6-year-olds do in wet leaves on a Saturday morning with single-minded dedication. Landon washed the dishes, Victoria dried them, which he hadn't asked her to do, and which she'd started doing without comment, and for a while they were just two people doing something ordinary in a kitchen. "She's remarkable," Victoria said, nodding toward the window where Macy was visible in the yard, crouched over something on the ground with intense focus. "She really is," Landon said. He handed her the last pan. "She's the thing I got most right in my life." "You got a lot right." Victoria set the pan on the counter and turned slightly toward him. "That table in your shop, the credenza. I looked at it this morning when I came through." She paused. "The dovetail joints on those drawers, Landon. I've been in enough boardrooms with expensive furniture to know the difference between someone who makes things and someone who builds them." He looked at her. "There's a difference?" "Completely different thing. Making is transactional. Building is, you're putting something permanent into the world. You know it's going to outlast you and you make your decisions accordingly." She paused. "Not many people do that." He was quiet for a moment, drying his hands on the dish towel. "I think about that sometimes," he said. "Whether it matters. Whether the table will still be in some family's dining room in 50 years, or whether it'll end up at an estate sale." "It'll still be there," Victoria said. "How do you know?" "Because of the way you made the joints," she said simply. He looked at her. This was the part he hadn't let himself think about last night. The part he'd filed away after she said what she said, and he'd said what he'd said, and they'd both decided to let the morning sort out what the night had opened. He hadn't let himself think about what it meant that this woman, who had known him for 7 years and never once inserted herself into his life, had walked up a dark driveway in the rain and knocked on his door and told him the most honest thing she probably had ever said to another person. He hadn't let himself think about what it meant that she was standing in his kitchen looking at him like he was something worth looking at. He also hadn't let himself think about Kara. He was going to have to do that, soon. "I need to tell you something," he said. Victoria waited. "Last night you said, you put something on the table that took a lot of courage. And I said what I said because it was honest, and I meant it." He stopped. "But I need you to understand that I have a 6-year-old daughter who I am not going to put through any kind of instability for any reason, including feelings I might have that I don't fully understand yet. And I need you to understand that there's a history between our families that is complicated and is going to stay complicated regardless of what happens next between us." "I know that," Victoria said. "I'm not saying that to push you away. I'm saying it because you're a person who makes his decisions like he makes his joints," she said. "For the long term. I know." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not asking you to decide anything, Landon. I came here last night because I had nowhere else that felt true. I'm not here to press you into something you're not ready for. I wouldn't do that." "I know you wouldn't." "Then we're having a conversation," she said. "That's all. That's all this has to be right now." He looked at her for a moment. Then something shifted in his chest. Not resolved. Nothing so clean as that, but a loosening, the way a drawer that's been stuck finally seats itself in the track properly and slides. "You want more coffee?" he asked. One corner of her mouth moved. "Yes." She left around noon. He walked her down to her car at the bottom of the road, the two of them in their jackets on the wet gravel, Macy watching from the porch with her hands in her sweatshirt pocket. The car was fine. She'd been worried about the overnight water in the wheel wells, but it started without complaint. "I'll call you," Victoria said, which was a strange thing to say to someone whose number she didn't have. But she said it like a statement of intent rather than a social nicety, which was how Victoria Sterling said most things. He leaned into the window slightly. "Kara's going to come," he said. "You know that. Not today, but soon." "I know." "What are you going to say to her?" Victoria looked at the road ahead for a moment, then she looked back at him. "The truth," she said. "I've been lying by omission for long enough. It hasn't helped either of us." She paused. "She may never forgive me for this. That's possible, and I have to accept it. But I'm not going to keep lying to her about who I am just to preserve a version of our relationship that doesn't actually function." Her jaw was set slightly. She deserves an honest mother more than she deserves a comfortable one. He straightened up. The wind came through and stirred the wet leaves along the edge of the road. "Drive safe," he said. She looked at him through the window, and there was something in her face, not hope exactly, more like the particular steadiness of a person who has made a decision and is committed to living with where it takes them. "Thank you," she said, "for not turning me away." He watched her car until it reached the bottom of the hill and turned onto the main road and disappeared. Then he stood there for another minute in the October cold, his hands in his jacket pockets, the storm's wreckage all around him in the form of fallen leaves and broken branches, and the deep, rich smell of soaked earth, and he tried to sort out what had just happened. He couldn't, entirely. Not yet. But he knew this. When he'd opened the door last night and found Victoria Sterling on his porch, broken in a way he'd never seen her broken, the first thing he'd felt, the very first thing, before the surprise and before the practicality of getting her a towel and putting the kettle on, was a sense of rightness so unexpected and so disorienting that he'd had to hold the doorframe for a second to locate himself. He hadn't let himself think about it last night. Standing at the bottom of his road with the leaves coming down around him, he allowed himself to think about it now. He turned and walked back up to the house, where Macy was still standing on the porch. "Is she coming back?" Macy asked. "I don't know," Landon said. "Then, honestly, maybe." Macy considered this. "I liked her," she announced. "Yeah," he said, opening the front door. I know. He sent her inside and stood there another moment in the doorway, looking at nothing in particular, feeling the October cold on his face. Inside, the wood stove was still going. The credenza was in the workshop waiting for him. The Henderson table was delayed 2 weeks, and there were calls to make on Monday. His life looked almost exactly the same as it had 24 hours ago. He knew it wasn't. The call came on Tuesday. Landon was in the workshop when his phone buzzed against the workbench, screen up, and he saw Victoria's name and felt something tighten in his chest that he chose not to examine too carefully. He set down the chisel, pulled off one glove, and answered. Hey, he said. Hi. Her voice was different on the phone than it had been in his kitchen, contained, the way it probably sounded in conference rooms, like she'd put her professional self back on and was calling from inside it. I wanted to let you know that Kara came by my condo yesterday. He was quiet for a second. How did that go? About as well as you'd expect. A pause. She was calmer than I anticipated, which was almost worse, honestly. When Kara's calm, it means she's already made a decision and the conversation is a formality. What was the decision? She told me she needs time, that she loves me, but she can't. She said she can't be around me right now while she figures out how she feels about all of this. Victoria's voice stayed level, but there was something underneath it, the same vibration he'd heard in his kitchen Saturday night. She was very composed about it, very measured. She didn't raise her voice. That sounds like her. It does. A beat. It's interesting, isn't it, that you know that about her, after everything. We were together 3 years, he said. You don't unlearn someone entirely. No, Victoria said. You don't. He leaned against the workbench. Outside the workshop window, the maple in the side yard had gone full October red overnight, the way they did out here, sudden and complete, like the tree had made a decision. Are you okay? He asked. Not particularly. She said it simply, without self-pity. But I've been not okay before and managed. I'll manage this. A pause that felt like she was choosing what came next. I wanted to tell you in person, actually, if you have time this week. I can do Thursday, he said. Macy has a thing after school. I'll have an hour. Thursday works, she said. There's a coffee place near the county road, Delia's. I don't know if you... I know it, he said. 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock. He set the phone back on the workbench and stood for a moment with his hands flat on the wood surface, feeling the grain under his palms the way he always did when he needed to think without thinking. The credenza was finished, the drawer fronts were sanded, and the hardware was fitted, and the whole piece was waiting for its final coat. He'd done good work on it. He knew that without needing anyone to tell him. He also knew that he'd been thinking about Victoria Sterling since she drove away Saturday and hadn't fully stopped. He picked the chisel back up and got back to work. Thursday came the way days do when you've been half thinking about something for 72 hours. Too fast and also somehow expected. He dropped Macy at her after-school art program, drove the 12 minutes to Delia's, and found Victoria already there, sitting at a table in the back with 2 coffees already ordered, because Victoria was the kind of person who arrived early and took care of things before you could do them yourself. She looked better than Saturday. The composed version of herself was back in place. Good coat, hair up, the particular quality of presence that filled a room just slightly more than her physical size would suggest. But there were things around her eyes that hadn't been there 6 years ago at those Sunday dinners. Small signs of fatigue that the competence couldn't quite cover. He noticed them because he was looking. And he was looking because he'd decided somewhere between Saturday and now that he was done pretending he wasn't. You look tired, he said, sitting down. Good morning to you too, she said, but the corner of her mouth moved. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. She pushed his coffee toward him. I haven't been sleeping well since Saturday. It's fine. It's not nothing. It's not nothing, she agreed, but it's manageable. She wrapped her hands around her own cup. I've been in damage control mode at work all week. There's a board meeting next month, and my CFO is... It doesn't matter. Point is, I know how to function on 4 hours. I've done it before. That's not something to be proud of, he said. She looked at him. Are you going to lecture me about self-care? I'm going to tell you that running on empty is how people make bad decisions. Spoken from experience? The first year after Kara left, I was running the business and taking care of a 6-month-old on maybe 4 hours a night, and I made 3 of the worst business decisions of my career. Underpriced 2 projects and took on a commission I wasn't equipped to finish on time. He picked up the coffee. Cost me almost $18,000 in the end. Victoria was quiet for a moment. What did you do? Ate the losses, called my clients, was honest about what happened. He shrugged. And then I made myself go to sleep at a reasonable hour for 6 months until I trusted my judgment again. She studied him. You're a very pragmatic person. I'm a person who learned things the hard way. Most pragmatic people are. She looked at the table, then back up. I wanted to tell you what I told you Saturday, about what Kara said. I want you to know that I've thought about it since then, about whether it was fair to tell you, whether putting that on you was the right thing. And I think it was honest, and I stand by it, but I also think— She stopped. I don't want you to feel cornered by this, Landon. I came to your house in a bad state, and I said things that were true, but that you didn't ask to hear. I don't want you to feel like you have to respond in kind out of some sense of— Victoria. He set down the cup. Stop. She stopped. I'm not here because I felt obligated to be polite to someone who showed up soaking wet at my house. He looked at her. I could have had that conversation on the phone. She absorbed this in the way she absorbed most things, quietly, without performance, turning it over. So what are you saying? She asked. I'm saying I'm here because I wanted to be here. He kept his voice even. And I'm saying that what I told you Saturday was true, and I meant it. And I've been doing a lot of thinking since then about what any of it means, and I don't have all of it figured out. He paused. But I know I'm not here because of politeness. The coffee shop made sounds around them. The hiss of the espresso machine, a conversation at the counter, someone's kid asking a question in the specific, incessant way of children who have one speed. Normal afternoon sounds, Tuesday sounds. Nothing about the table they were sitting at looked remarkable from the outside. Tell me about the feelings, he said, the ones Kara said she saw. Tell me what it actually looked like from where you were standing. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat back slightly, the way a person does when they're deciding to stop protecting something. The first time I met you, she said, was at a dinner at Kara's apartment. You'd been together about 3 months. She told me about you. She said you were sweet and talented, and she really liked you. Those were her words. A pause. You came in from the cold, and you had sawdust on your jacket, and you apologized for it immediately, and Kara waved you off, and you sat down at the table, and the first thing you did was ask me what I did for work. She looked at the cup. Not to be polite. You actually wanted to know. And when I explained what the company did, you asked about the imaging technology, a specific question, a real one. And then you said that it reminded you of how reading wood grain works, finding what's underneath by how the surface behaves. He remembered that dinner. He hadn't thought about it in a long time. I went home that night and I thought about that, she said. That was all it was. A thought I had. I put it away. She paused. But then there was the dinner at my place in November, when Kara was late because of traffic, and you sat at my kitchen table for 40 minutes while I cooked, and we talked about the company I'd sold in my 30s, the one before the current one, and whether it had been the right decision. You were the only person besides my attorney who ever asked me if I regretted it. A pause. Everyone else always told me it was the right move. You asked if I regretted it. Do you? He asked. Still? Sometimes, she said. That company was built differently, more personal. The scale now it's a different animal. She shook her head slightly. You see, that's exactly what I mean. You asked me a real question, and I'm answering it honestly, and this is the thing that kept happening. Every time we were in the same room, somehow we ended up talking about something real. She looked at him. That wasn't accidental on my end, Landon. I want to be honest about that. I sought it out. I found reasons for us to talk. He let that sit for a second. And you felt guilty about it, he said. I felt guilty about it for years. She was my daughter, and he was her partner, and there was no version of what I was feeling that was acceptable. So I put it in a box. She paused. Apparently, not a very good box. Kara saw it. Kara's always been perceptive, more than I gave her credit for, I think. She saw it and she put it in her own box and carried it around, and it did what things do when you carry them too long. Her voice was steady, but there was weight behind it. She said last Sunday that she didn't end the engagement because you did anything wrong. She wanted me to know that. Landon was very still. She said she ended it because she realized she was never fully secure in the relationship, and she finally understood why. Not because you were doing anything, just because she knew. Victoria looked at him. I don't say that to... I'm not trying to retroactively reframe what happened between you two. You and Kara had your own reasons. I know that. We did, he said. But that's... He stopped. That's a lot to have been carrying around. Yes, she paused. For all of us, apparently. Outside the coffee shop window, a woman went by with a stroller and a coffee cup, moving fast, her jacket not quite warm enough for the weather. Just a person having a Tuesday. Landon watched her for a second. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. The marriage. You said Saturday it ended a long time ago. What does that mean? A long time? Victoria turned her cup slowly on the table. Richard and I stopped being a real couple about 12 years ago. We maintained the form of it for another 3 years, and then he moved out, and we were technically separated for 2 more before the divorce was finalized. 7 years ago. She paused. He wasn't a bad person. He was a distracted one. We were both distracted people who were better at running toward our work than toward each other. Who ended it? He did, formally, but I'd ended it a long time before he said the words. She paused. I was relieved, which I think is actually the saddest thing about it. When he told me he wanted a divorce, I felt relieved. Do you still see him? At Kara's, sometimes. We're civil. A pause. He remarried 2 years ago, a woman in his field. She's very nice, and he seems genuinely happy, and I have absolutely no feelings about it beyond a vague satisfaction that it worked out for him. She tilted her head slightly. Does that seem cold? No, Landon said. It seems honest. I've been accused of being too much of both. By who? Richard. Kara sometimes. The people who work for me and find me difficult. She paused. I prefer honesty to the alternative. Always have. It's gotten me into trouble and it's gotten me out of trouble, and overall I think it's still the right policy. He looked at her. The coffee shop moved around them. He was aware of time in a way he didn't usually pay attention to. The way this hour had its own weight. The way it was going to matter later in ways neither of them could fully see yet. I need to be honest with you about something, he said. Okay. There are things about this that I'm not certain about. I don't know how Kara's going to react when she finds out that we've been talking. I don't know what this is. I don't know what to tell Macy or when. He paused. And there's a part of me that still isn't sure whether I'm drawn to you because of who you genuinely are or because of the situation we're in. Intensity does things to people. I've been through enough to know that. Victoria nodded slowly. I appreciate that, she said. The honesty. I'm not trying to be discouraging. You're not. You're being careful, which is different. She looked at him. I've spent 20 years making large decisions quickly. Acquisitions, restructurings, personnel decisions. I got good at fast, and I think it made me bad at slow. She paused. I don't want to rush this, whatever it is. I don't want to turn this into something else because I'm in the habit of moving fast. So what do you want? He asked. She thought about it. He could see her actually thinking, not performing consideration, actually working through it. I want to have more conversations like this one, she said finally. Real ones. I want to know who you are now, not who I thought I knew from Sunday dinners 7 years ago. She paused. And I want to be honest with Kara when she's ready to hear it. I'm done managing her impression of me. It hasn't served either of us. She may not take it well. She may not. Victoria was quiet for a moment. She's my daughter, and I love her, and I would do most things to protect that relationship. But I will not lie to her about who I am anymore. Her voice was steady. She accused me of never being present. She was right. The least I can do now is be present enough to be honest, even when it's uncomfortable. Landon looked at her. He was quiet for a moment. My mother left when I was 11, he said. Victoria was still. She didn't go dramatically or for dramatic reasons. She just decided one day that the life she had wasn't the life she wanted, and she left. My dad handled it as well as he could, which is to say, not particularly well. And I grew up in a house where the thing nobody talked about was the most present thing in every room. Landon, I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I'm telling you because it's why I am the way I am about honesty. And it's why Macy, he stopped. It's why Macy is the way she is. I decided when she was born that she was going to grow up in a house where things got said. Not everything, not without judgment. But the real things, the things that matter, those got said. He paused. And it's why when you said what you said Saturday night, I didn't shut the door. Victoria looked at him with an expression that wasn't pity and wasn't softness exactly, but was something more specific than either of those, like recognition. You've been taking care of people for a long time, she said quietly. I'm okay at it. You're better than okay at it. She paused. Who takes care of you? He hadn't expected that question. He sat with it for a second. Macy mostly, he said. That sounds backwards. It sounds honest. He looked at his coffee. I have a friend, Marcus. He's been around since before Macy was born. He checks in. We go fishing sometimes. He doesn't ask a lot of questions. Neither do I. He paused. It works for us. We're both kind of built that way. Men, Victoria said without judgment. Men, he agreed. She laughed then, briefly, quietly, the kind of laugh that escapes without planning, and he felt something loosen in the air between them, the way it does sometimes in a good conversation when you finally get past the careful part and arrive somewhere that's just two people being real with each other. Tell me about the photography, he said. She blinked. I beg your pardon? You used to... I remember at that first dinner, before you knew me at all, there was a photograph on the wall of Kara's apartment, black and white, the grain elevator out on Route 9. And I said something about it, asked who took it, and Kara said it was yours. He paused. And you changed the subject. Victoria looked at him. Something moved through her face. You remembered that, she said. It was a good photograph. She was quiet for a moment. I used to shoot. In my 20s, before the first company. Film, mostly. I had a dark room in the apartment where I lived. It was the size of a closet, and it smelled like chemicals constantly, and the landlord hated it. A small pause. I was good. Not professional level good, but genuinely good. I had an eye for it. What happened? Life happened. The first company needed 12 hours a day, and then 16, and then it just... She moved her hand slightly. It required everything. Photography requires stillness, and I stopped being a still person somewhere around 32. She paused. I still have the equipment. It's in a storage unit near the condo. When did you last use it? 4 years ago, maybe? I took it out during the pandemic, actually. Shot some things around the city. They were good, I think. She paused. I never showed anyone. Why not? She considered the question. Because showing someone means caring about what they think. And I'd spent a long time not letting myself care about things like that. The work was easier. She looked at him. The work doesn't look at you a certain way when it thinks something is beautiful. It's just output. That sounds lonely, he said. It was, she said, simply. No defense. He turned the cup in his hands. Macy's been asking me to take her on a hike up at Kettner Ridge. There's a lookout about 3 miles up. You can see the whole valley from there. It's good in November before the trees go completely bare. Victoria looked at him. She was very still. She's going to ask you 27 questions the whole way up, he said. She has one speed. So I've gathered. And it's 3 miles of uneven trail, so you'd need actual shoes, not... He glanced at her boots, which were expensive and impractical. Not those. I own hiking boots, she said. Do you? I bought them 3 years ago to go on a trip to Colorado that my CFO convinced me to take, and then I came back after 2 days because of a crisis at work. She paused. They've been in the closet since. That's a shame, he said. She looked at him, and there was something in her face that was careful and warm and not entirely controlled. "Are you asking me to go on a hike with you and your 6-year-old daughter?" she asked. "I'm telling you about a hike I'm taking with my 6-year-old daughter," he said. "You can do whatever you want with that information." The corner of her mouth moved. "Saturday?" she said. "Saturday," he said. They sat for a minute in easy silence, the kind that only exists between people who have gotten somewhere real together. The coffee shop moved around them. Someone's phone rang and was quickly silenced. The espresso machine hissed. "I keep thinking about what you said," Victoria said finally. "About the Henderson table being delayed." He looked at her. "That was in a different conversation." "I know, but you mentioned your supplier let you down and you had to make a call you'd been putting off. And I keep thinking—" She paused. "Do you have a backup supplier for the White Oak, someone in the region?" He looked at her. "Where is this going?" "I know a man who runs a mill operation up near Harwick. Salvage lumber, mostly. Old barns, demolished buildings. His White Oak is exceptional, and he's reliable." She paused. "I've used him for some renovation work at the company's facility. I could introduce you." "You don't have to—" "Landon." She looked at him evenly. "I'm not doing you a favor. I'm telling you about a resource that would benefit your business. If you don't want the introduction, tell me and I'll drop it." He was quiet for a second. "No," he said. "That would be useful. Thank you. I'll send you his information tonight." She picked up her coffee. Matter of fact, clean, the way she moved through things. The Salvage Oak usually runs a little more per board foot, but the quality is significantly better and the grain is tighter. It would suit your work. He looked at her. "Have you been to his mill?" "Once. He showed me around." A pause. "There's a piece there. A slab of black walnut, about 8 feet long, 2 inches thick, came out of a farmhouse in Renfield County. He's been waiting for the right person to commission it. I keep thinking about it." She paused. "I keep thinking it would make a beautiful dining table." "Why didn't you commission it?" "Because I don't have a dining room," she said. "I have a condo with a kitchen counter where I eat alone over my laptop." She said it without self-pity, just fact. "It would be wasted on me." The thing he didn't say, and that he was aware of not saying, was that dining tables were meant for families, and that he built them for exactly that reason, because the people who sat around them were the people you came home to. He didn't say it, but he thought she knew. "I should go," she said, checking the time. "I have a 3:30 call I can't miss." He stood when she stood, and she noticed that, and something crossed her face briefly. Not discomfort, more like she was adjusting to something, refiling it somewhere. They walked out together. The parking lot was cold, the sky going gray and flat the way October afternoons did out here before November made its announcement. At her car, she turned. "Saturday?" she said. "Saturday," he said. She looked at him a second longer than was strictly necessary, and then she got in the car and drove away. And he stood in the parking lot in the cold and watched the taillights until they turned onto the county road. He thought about the walnut slab at the mill in Harwick, 8 feet long, 2 inches thick, the kind of wood you built things to last with. He thought about Victoria Sterling eating alone at a kitchen counter over a laptop in a condo with no dining room. He thought about Macy on Saturday, 3 miles of trail, 27 questions. The valley spread out below the ridge like everything that was possible. He got in his truck. His hands were steady on the wheel, and his chest was full of something that didn't have a name yet, and he drove home in the October gray and went back to work. Because that was what you did, and because some things took time to become what they were going to be, and rushing them ruined the grain. He knew that better than most. The hike happened the way things happen when nobody's trying to make them perfect, imperfectly, and better for it. Victoria arrived at the trailhead 12 minutes late because she'd taken the wrong fork off the county road and ended up in a gravel lot behind a feed store 3 miles east. She called Landon from there, slightly frustrated with herself, and he talked her through the correction without making anything of it, just a set of landmarks and a left turn. And when she finally pulled in beside his truck, he was leaning against the tailgate with his hands in his jacket pockets, and Macy was crouched in the gravel studying something near the tire with the focused intensity of a scientist mid-discovery. "You made it," he said. "I made it," she said, getting out. She was wearing the hiking boots. He noticed and said nothing, which she appreciated. "Dad, there's a really big beetle," Macy said without looking up. "Leave it where it lives, Mace." "I'm just looking." Victoria crouched down beside her. The beetle was large and black and moving with unhurried purpose toward the grass at the edge of the lot. "Do you know what kind it is?" Victoria asked. Macy looked up at her with the particular expression she'd been deploying since Saturday morning, the one that meant she was deciding something. "Ground beetle," she said. "Probably. They eat other bugs." A pause. "Do you like bugs?" "I don't have strong feelings about them either way," Victoria said. "As long as they're not in my apartment." "We had a spider in the kitchen once," Macy said, standing up and brushing her knees with the businesslike efficiency of a person moving on. "Dad put it outside. He said, every creature has a right to its own life." Victoria looked at Landon over Macy's head. He shrugged slightly, which meant that was in fact something he'd said, and he wasn't embarrassed about it. They started up the trail. The first mile was easy. Wide path, gradual incline, the woods on either side of them gone gold and rust, and the stubborn late-holding green of the hemlocks. Macy walked between them for a while, and then ahead of them and then behind them depending on what caught her attention, narrating continuously. She wanted to know how Victoria's company worked. She wanted to know if Victoria had ever been to the ocean. She wanted to know why some trees held their leaves longer than others. And when Victoria said she wasn't certain, Macy accepted this without disappointment and filed a query with her father, who explained it with the patient thoroughness of a man who had answered approximately 40,000 questions from this child and had stopped resenting any of them years ago. The second mile got steeper, and Macy got quieter, concentrating on the trail, and Victoria found herself walking beside Landon in a silence that was easy in a way she hadn't expected. She was not a person who did silence well as a rule. Silence in her life had always meant either crisis or avoidance. The particular quiet of conference rooms before bad news. The quiet of her condo on nights when the city was muffled and she had nothing left to do and nowhere to be, and had to sit with the fact that she'd built a very successful life that was also, in places, quite empty. This silence was different. It was occupied. "You okay?" Landon asked at one point, not looking at her, just checking. "I'm good," she said, and meant it. The lookout was a natural clearing at the top of the ridge, a flat shelf of rock extending out over the valley with nothing between you and the distance. The trees had thinned enough that the sky was wide overhead, pale November blue, and below the ridge the valley spread in a patchwork of fields and woodlots and the gray line of the river 3 miles east. Macy walked straight to the edge of the rock shelf and stood there with her arms out slightly like she was balancing, which made Landon move 2 steps closer without appearing to move closer. Victoria watched him do that and felt something register in her chest that she didn't immediately catalog. "It's really far down," Macy said. "Yep," Landon said. "I can see the grain elevator." "That's in Colby, about 8 miles. Macy looked at it for a long moment. Then she turned around and looked at Victoria. "Did you bring your camera?" Victoria paused. "What?" "Dad said you used to take pictures." Victoria looked at Landon. He was looking at the valley, not at her, but his jaw moved slightly. "I didn't bring it," she said. "Not today." Macy thought about this. "You should bring it next time," she said simply, and turned back to the view. The matter settled. Victoria stood on this rock shelf and looked at the valley below and felt the cold air off the ridge against her face and thought about the word next time in the mouth of a 6-year-old who said things without strategy. She thought about her camera in the storage unit, the Leica she'd bought herself at 31, with the first real money she'd made, wrapped in a cloth case, waiting in the dark. Next time, she thought. The 3 of them ate sandwiches on the rock. Landon had packed them without announcing it, pulling them out of his backpack with the practical, unpretentious ease of a person who thought ahead without needing credit for it. They sat with their backs against a boulder out of the wind, and Macy ate half of hers and then fell asleep between them with her head on Landon's shoulder, which apparently she did on hikes sometimes. He explained without apparent surprise. Victoria looked at the sleeping child and then at Landon. "She's extraordinary," Victoria said quietly. "Yeah." He looked down at Macy briefly with the particular expression fathers have when they think no one is watching. "She's the part of me that came out better." They sat in the quiet for a while, the valley below and the sky above and the sleeping child between them. And Victoria thought she could count on one hand the times in her adult life when she had felt this specific quality of peace, and most of those times had something to do with a camera and a moment she'd managed to be still enough to catch. She didn't say any of that, she just sat with it. On the way back down, Macy woke up and resumed operations immediately. No transition period, just eyes open and talking again. And Victoria found herself laughing twice at things the child said. Real laughter, not performance. And she noticed Landon noticing that. In the parking lot, before they split for their cars, Macy hugged Victoria around the waist without preamble, the way children did when they'd decided about a person. Victoria stood there for a moment with her arms slightly out, and then she put them around the child and held on. And over Macy's head she looked at Landon, and his expression was careful and warm and complicated and honest. "Saturday next week?" Macy said, pulling back. "We'll see," Landon said. Macy looked at Victoria. "He means yes," she said confidentially. Victoria drove home with the windows cracked and the cold air coming in, and she thought about the grain elevator 8 miles out and the way Macy had stood at the edge of the rock with her arms out. She thought about the Leica in the storage unit. She stopped at the storage place on her way back to the condo. The camera was where she'd left it, wrapped in its cloth, inside a waterproof case inside a larger box. She sat on the concrete floor of the unit in her hiking boots and her good jacket, and took it out and held it and turned it over in her hands. The weight of it was exactly as she remembered. The metal body, the familiar resistance of the shutter button, the way it settled against the palm like it belonged there. She put a battery in it. After a moment, it powered on. She took 3 photographs of the storage unit wall. They weren't good photographs, geek. Bad light, nothing worth looking at. She didn't care. She sat there and took them and felt something unlock in her chest. Small and quiet and real. She put the camera in her bag and drove home. That was 3 weeks ago. Now it was the second Saturday in November, and the developments of those 3 weeks had accumulated the way things did. Not dramatically, not in one direction at once, but with the irregular pressure of real life coming from multiple sides at different times and not giving you the option of addressing them one at a time. The situation with Kara had shifted, twice. The first time, Victoria had texted her daughter 8 days after the confrontation at the condo. Not to explain herself or defend herself, just a short message. "I want you to know that I love you. Everything else we can figure out when you're ready." Kara hadn't responded for 4 days, which was its own message. When the response finally came, it was 2 sentences. "I know you love me, Mom. I just need more time." Which was not forgiveness and was not rejection, and was the particular kind of provisional truce that families negotiated when they were still mid-collision. The second shift was harder. Landon told her about it on the phone the previous Wednesday, his voice measured in the way it got when he was choosing each word carefully. "Kara called me," he said. Victoria went still. "When?" "Monday night. She didn't yell. She was controlled." He paused. "She wanted to know what was happening between us. She said she'd heard something, and from who I don't know, and she wanted to hear it from me directly." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That we'd talked. That I'd seen her. That I wasn't sure where it was going, but that I wasn't going to lie to her about it." A pause. "She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she felt blindsided. That she'd expected me to... I think she expected me to tell her there was nothing to it." "What did she say after the quiet?" "She said she needed to think. Then she said..." He stopped. "She said it felt like a betrayal, from both of us." Victoria closed her eyes. "I told her I understood why it felt that way," Landon said, "and that I wasn't going to make the decision about what I did with my life based on what was convenient for other people. I said that as gently as I could." A pause. "I don't think it landed gently." "It wouldn't," Victoria said. "Not to Kara." She hung up. "I haven't heard back." Victoria sat with that. Then she said, "I'm sorry you had to take that." "Don't apologize for what's true," he said. "That's not something you need to do." She'd thought about that call for the rest of the week. She'd thought about it while running board prep and while reviewing the Q4 projections, and while standing at her kitchen counter over her laptop at 9 o'clock at night, eating reheated soup. She'd thought about whether she was being selfish, whether the thing she was building toward, slowly, carefully, without rushing, was worth the damage it was creating in the family she'd already spent years getting wrong. And she kept arriving at the same place, that she'd spent 50 years managing other people's comfort at the expense of her own truth, and that it hadn't made Kara feel more loved, and it hadn't made her marriage work, and it hadn't made her a more present person. It had only made her lonelier and more defended. It had only made the box bigger. She wasn't doing that anymore. Which brought her to this Saturday morning. Landon had called Friday evening and asked if she wanted to come over, not for a hike, just dinner, the three of them. Casual, Macy had been asking. She'd said yes. She'd brought wine and a book she'd found for Macy, a field guide to beetles and other ground insects, which she'd ordered online with the deliberate intention of being a person who paid attention to what children cared about. Dinner had been good. Landon made pasta, the real kind, not from a box, and Macy had appointed herself the garlic bread supervisor with the gravity of someone managing a critical operation, and the three of them had sat at Landon's kitchen table in the lamplight while the November dark pressed against the windows, and it had felt not perfect. Comfortable wasn't quite the right word either. It felt like something that was becoming itself, a thing in early stages that was already stronger than it looked. After dinner, Macy showed Victoria the beetle book with undisguised delight, identifying 4 species she'd personally observed and 2 she planned to observe. Landon did the dishes. Victoria sat on the floor of the living room with Macy and the book spread between them and felt, for the 3rd or 4th time in recent weeks, the particular quality of being present that she'd forgotten was possible. Macy fell asleep on the couch at 8:45 mid-sentence. Landon carried her upstairs and came back, and they sat in the living room with the lamp on and the remains of the wine, and they talked until past 11 about things that didn't have an agenda. His father, her early company, the mill in Harwick, where he'd driven the previous week, and had looked at the walnut slab and confirmed it was exactly as extraordinary as she'd described. "I'm going to commission it," he said. "For a client?" He was quiet for a second. "Not yet. I'll figure out where it belongs." He paused. "Some pieces you buy because you know they're meant for something, even if you don't know what yet." She'd looked at him when he said that, and he'd looked back, and neither of them said the thing that was present in the room, because they were both people who understood that some things needed to be arrived at in their own time. She'd driven home at 11:30 and stood in her condo and looked at the photographs pinned to a small corkboard she'd set up by the window. She'd been shooting for 3 weeks now, mostly early mornings, before work, the street below the condo, the light on the building across the way, her coffee cup against the window with the city behind it. She'd put 6 of them up on the board. They were good. She knew they were good the way she'd always known, the eye coming back like a muscle you'd neglected, sore at first and then strong. She'd stood at the board for a long time before she went to bed. The next morning, this morning, was when Kara came. Victoria was at the condo, the camera on the table, reviewing shots from the morning when the buzzer rang at 9:15. She wasn't expecting anyone. She pressed the intercom. "It's me," Kara said. Victoria pressed the door release and went to put the kettle on. Because you put the kettle on, because you needed something to do with your hands, because this was the conversation she'd known was coming and had been preparing for and wasn't remotely prepared for. Kara came in looking like her mother, which she always did in a way that Victoria found alternately gratifying and unsettling. Same height, same posture, same quality of focused presence. She was 31 now, her hair shorter than she'd worn it in her 20s, and she was wearing the kind of controlled, neutral expression that meant she'd been rehearsing. "Sit down," Victoria said. "I'm making tea." "I don't need tea, Mom." "I need tea," Victoria said. "Sit down." Kara sat. She put her bag on the floor beside the chair and folded her hands in her lap and looked around the condo. Her eyes landed on the corkboard by the window, the photographs. She looked at it for a moment. "You're shooting again," she said. "Yes." Victoria brought the mugs and sat across from her. Kara looked at the photographs a moment longer, then looked at her mother. Her expression shifted slightly. Not softened exactly, but complicated. "They're good," she said. "I know." Kara made a short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You've always said things like that, like it's rude to be uncertain about your own abilities. I've always thought false modesty was a waste of time." "I know you have." Kara looked at the table. That's not actually what I came to talk about. I know. Kara looked up. Are you in a relationship with Landon Pierce? We are. Victoria paused. We're becoming something. I don't have a clean word for what it is right now. Kara was very still. How long has this been happening? Since October, the night I came to your place and you asked me to leave. You went to him. I didn't go to him. I had nowhere. Victoria stopped. I drove, and I ended up at his road, and I went in because he was someone I trusted, and I was in a bad state. She paused. I'm not going to apologize for that. Kara's jaw tightened. I'm not asking you to apologize for going somewhere safe. I'm asking you about what's been happening since. We've talked. We've seen each other several times. Macy, don't. Kara's voice sharpened. Don't bring up his daughter right now. Victoria was quiet. Do you understand how this looks? Kara said. Do you understand what it means that my mother is... She stopped. He was going to be my husband, Mom. I know that. He was going to be my family, and you are. You're my mother, and the two of you are... Kara. Victoria's voice was quiet and even. I need to say some things to you. I need you to let me say them. Kara said nothing, which was not permission, but was space. When you ended your engagement to Landon, you told me it was because you couldn't be fully present in the relationship. Those were your words, and I accepted them because I had no standing to challenge them. Victoria looked at her daughter directly. But I think you and I both know that what you felt was something more specific, and I think we've both been not saying it for 6 years. Kara's expression tightened. Mom, I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because we need to stop operating from inside a silence that isn't working for either of us. Victoria set down the mug. You said, when you asked me to leave that night, that you'd known for years. You said you saw something. I'm not going to keep pretending you were wrong. The room was quiet. Outside the condo windows, the city was going about its Saturday morning, indifferent. What I felt for him, Victoria said, was something I became aware of slowly and managed and buried and have been carrying for years. It was never acted on. It was never a factor in anything that happened between the two of you. You ended that relationship for your own legitimate reasons at your own time. Nothing I felt had anything to do with that. That's not the point, Kara said, and her voice was unsteady now, in a way it hadn't been when she came in. The point is that you're my mother. The point is that there are things you don't do, lines you don't cross because of what they mean. I understand why you feel that way. Do you? Kara looked at her with something raw in it now. I've spent my whole life trying to matter to you, trying to be something that could keep your attention for longer than it took you to check your phone for work emails. And then I find out that the person who could actually hold your attention was the man I almost married. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Do you understand how that feels? Victoria absorbed it. She didn't deflect, and she didn't immediately try to fix it. She let it land. Yes, she said, I think I do. And I'm not going to tell you that it isn't painful or that you don't have the right to feel it. She paused. What I'm going to tell you is that what I felt for Landon was never something I chose over you. It was something I felt in spite of every reason not to, and something I suppressed for years precisely because of you. She paused. Whether that helps or not, it's true. It doesn't help, Kara said quietly. I know. Kara looked at the table. Her hands were flat on it now, pressed down. Victoria recognized that. It was the thing they both did when they were trying to stay level. One of the ways they were alike that neither of them had ever commented on. What do you want from me? Kara asked. What are you looking for from this conversation? I'm not looking for permission, Victoria said. I want to be honest with you. I want us to stop having the version of a relationship where we say the comfortable thing instead of the true thing. She paused. I've been doing that with you for 31 years. I'm not willing to do it anymore. Not because I don't love you, because I do more than anything, but because it hasn't helped us. It's kept us at a distance that I don't want anymore. So you're doing this for us, Kara said, and there was a bitterness in it. I'm doing this because it's true, Victoria said. You can decide what to do with it. Kara was quiet for a long time, long enough that the kettle on the stove, which Victoria had forgotten, began to rattle slightly against the burner. I don't know how to feel about any of this, Kara said finally. Her voice was quieter now, the sharpness gone, something underneath it that was exhausted and maybe, at the edges, a little relieved. I came here ready to... I had things I was going to say, prepared things. What happened to them? You said them first. Kara looked up. You always do that. You always say the thing before I can say it, and then I don't know what to do with myself. That's not a quality I always have, Victoria said. I've been practicing. Something crossed Kara's face. Are you in therapy? I have been. For about 6 months. A pause. I'm not thrilled with it, honestly. It's uncomfortable and slow, but it's helping. Kara stared at her. You're in therapy? You sound surprised. I've been trying to get you to go to therapy for 10 years. I know, Victoria said. I told you it wasn't necessary. I was wrong about that. Kara looked at her, and the expression on her face was something Victoria hadn't seen from her daughter in a very long time. Something that was tired and surprised and not quite all the way to soft, but moving in that direction. Like someone who came to a fight and found out the fight had already rearranged itself into something harder to dismiss. I'm still angry, Kara said. I know. I don't know if I'm ever going to be okay with whatever is happening with you and him. I don't know if I can be. She paused. He was important to me. He was, Victoria said, and he's a good person. You know that. That's not the issue. The issue is that you're my mother, Kara said, and her voice was flat with it. Yes, Victoria said simply, and I can't undo that. And I wouldn't if I could. She looked at her daughter. I'm asking you for time. Not acceptance, not blessing, time. Time for you to figure out where you land on this. She paused. I'm not going anywhere. You're my daughter. That doesn't change. Kara looked at the table for a long moment. Then she looked at the corkboard again, the photographs pinned up in the November light. The one of the grain elevator, she said, from a few years ago. Victoria looked. One of the photographs she'd printed from the 3 weeks of shooting was there. She'd passed the Colby grain elevator on the way back from Kettner Ridge and had stopped and shot it from the access road, the old wooden structure against the flat sky, the light doing something particular to the vertical lines. You remembered it, Victoria said. You had it in my apartment. I always liked it. Kara's voice was quieter. You never told me you took it. I found out when Landon asked. A pause. He asked because he noticed it. He said it was a good photograph. Victoria was very still. He paid attention to things, Kara said. Not as accusation, just as fact. He was always paying attention to things most people walked past. She looked at her hands. I think that's what I liked about him. And I think that's also what made it complicated, because the things he noticed included you. She was quiet for a second. I knew. I knew for a long time, and I didn't say it because saying it would have made it real. Kara, I'm not blaming you. I'm saying I knew. She picked up the tea mug and held it with both hands. I ended it because I wanted out. Not because of you, because I wasn't right for him. We were good, but we weren't right, and I knew it, and I kept waiting for it to become right, and it didn't. She paused. And then I stayed angry about it for years, which is easier than admitting you ended something that wasn't broken. Victoria looked at her daughter. It took courage to say that. Don't make it into something. I'm not. I'm just saying it's true. Kara set the mug down. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the window. The November light came through flat and clean and lit the side of her face the same way it lit her mother's. I need time, she said. I know. I mean real time, not don't call me every week to check in. I'll call you when I'm ready. Okay, Victoria said. And I need you to be honest with me, going forward, about all of it. She looked at her mother. No more managing, no more of the composed version. If something is true, you tell me, even if it's hard. Even if it's hard, Victoria agreed. Kara stood. She picked up her bag and stood in the middle of the room for a moment, Not quite ready to go. Not quite ready to stay. Victoria recognized that too. The in-between of a person who has said the thing and isn't yet sure what comes after it. The photographs are really good, Kara said. You should show them to someone. I'm working up to it, Victoria said. Kara looked at her once more, and in her face was the full complicated weight of 31 years, all of it in one look. The anger and the love and the exhaustion and the thread of something underneath it that was, even now, still reaching. Then she went to the door and let herself out. Victoria sat in the quiet of the condo for a long time. She didn't move to clean up the mugs or look at the camera or do anything useful. She just sat with it, the conversation settling around her the way things settled after they'd been said. She thought about Kara at 31, carrying 6 years of something she'd never put words to. She thought about herself at 50, having spent decades being a composed, managed, professional version of a person while the real one sat in a storage unit waiting for better conditions. She thought about Landon Pierce at the bottom of a wet driveway in October, saying, "Come inside, you're soaked," without hesitation, without precondition. She reached over and picked up the camera from the table, looked at it for a moment. Then she got up, put on her coat, and went out into the November morning. There was a park 3 blocks from her building, small and not particularly beautiful. Just a city park with benches and some old trees and a fountain that was turned off for the winter. She'd walked through it 1,000 times without really seeing it. She saw it now. She was there for 2 hours. She shot 43 frames. She shot the light on the dry fountain basin, the particular way the leaf litter had arranged itself against a park bench, an elderly man on the far side of the park throwing bread for pigeons, with the methodical patience of someone who had been doing this for years and had no intention of stopping. She shot the way the bare branches crossed each other against the sky. She shot the bench where the armrest had been repaired badly, a thick bolt through old iron, function over form, holding it together. She stood at the park gate on her way out and looked back at it for a moment. Then she took one more frame, the whole park from the gate, the trees and the benches, and the turned-off fountain, and the old man still there, still throwing bread, the city going on around him on all sides. She looked at it in the viewfinder and she thought, this is real. This is the thing, not the composed version, not the managed performance. This. She walked back to the condo in the cold, and sat at her kitchen counter and loaded the shots and went through them one by one. And they were good, genuinely good, the best she'd done in years. And she felt something in her chest that she recognized eventually as the particular satisfaction of being exactly who you are without editing it for an audience. She pulled out her phone and texted Landon. Not long, just, "Kara came today. It was hard. It was honest. I think it was the right thing. Also, I shot 43 frames this morning, and they're good." He wrote back in less than 2 minutes. "Glad she came. Glad you're okay. And yeah, they would be." She set the phone down and looked at the photographs on her screen and felt something settle. Not resolved, not all the way, because Kara was still out there with her time and her anger and her 31 years of complicated love, and that was going to take what it took. But underneath the unresolved parts was something steady. Something she'd been a long time building back. She looked at the photograph of the bent armrest, the bolt through old iron, holding. Good enough, she thought. For now. December came in cold and without ceremony. The walnut slab arrived at Landon's workshop on a Tuesday morning, delivered by the mill owner's son in a flatbed truck, wrapped in moving blankets and strapped down with the kind of care that told you the people handling it understood what they had. Landon stood in the driveway and watched them unload it and felt the specific satisfaction of a man receiving something he'd been thinking about for weeks. 8 feet long, 2 inches thick, the grain running clean and dark through the heartwood, the edges still natural where the bark had been, the whole surface rough cut and waiting. He ran his hand along it once after they'd set it on the sawhorses in the workshop. The wood was cold from the truck. He could already see the table in it. Not imagined, not projected, just visible the way things were visible to people who'd spent enough years reading wood. The grain told you what it wanted to become. You either listened or you didn't. He took a photograph and sent it to Victoria. She called him 12 seconds later. "That's the one," she said. "Yeah," he said. "That's the one." "What are you going to do with it?" He looked at it for a moment. "I'm going to build it right," he said, "and then I'll figure out where it belongs." She was quiet briefly, And in the quiet was everything neither of them had said yet about the future, the shape of it, the possibility that was accumulating the way the work accumulated. Slowly, piece by piece, with intention. "I want to see it," she said, "when it's done." "You'll see it," he said. He started on it that afternoon. The first date, the one he'd actually called a date specifically, without the buffer of a hike or a casual dinner with Macy present, happened on a Friday in early December. He'd asked her the week before, plainly, the way he did things. He'd said, "I want to take you somewhere, just us, Friday night, if you're free." She'd said yes without asking where, which told him something. He took her to a restaurant 40 minutes north, a small place in an old converted mill building on a creek, the kind of place that had been there 30 years and wasn't trying to be anything other than what it was. Good food, real food, a wine list that wasn't trying to impress anyone, wooden floors that had been walked on long enough to have character. He'd been twice before, both times alone, both times on the kind of day when he needed to be somewhere that felt like it had been built to last. Victoria walked in and looked around, and something in her face settled the way it did when she approved of something that wasn't trying too hard. "Good choice," she said. "I know what I'm doing occasionally," he said. They sat at a corner table near the window that looked out over the creek, dark and moving in the December cold, and the evening was slow and unhurried and real. They ordered without performing deliberation over the menu. They talked. The actual kind of talking. The kind that went somewhere, where one thing led to another and you looked up and an hour had passed. She told him about the first company she'd built, the one she'd sold at 38. Not the version she told in interviews, the clean arc, the strategic exit, but the actual version, where she'd built something personal and irreplaceable and then sold it because she was exhausted and afraid and didn't trust herself to keep running it without running it into the ground, and had spent 3 years afterwards second-guessing the decision before she had the sense to stop. The new company was better in some ways, she said, more scalable, better structure, a team that could run without me in the room. She turned the wine glass slowly. But it never felt the same. The first one had, I was in it differently. It was mine in a way the second one isn't. She paused. I think I've been trying to recreate that feeling for 12 years. Can you? No, she said, which is probably something I needed to accept about 6 years earlier than I did. What does that mean for the company you have now? She thought about it. It means I run it well and I care about it, and I'm good at what I do. But I don't love it the way I loved the first one. And pretending otherwise, to the board, to my team, to myself, has cost me things. She paused. I think that's part of why the photography matters. It's the thing I do that's just mine. No exit strategy, no board, no version of it I have to defend to anyone. He looked at her. Have you shown anyone the new shots yet? I showed my assistant. She's 26 and very enthusiastic about everything, so it's not exactly a rigorous critical evaluation. A pause. I've been thinking about a gallery in the city. Small place, does shows by local photographers. I know the owner slightly. You should do it. I might embarrass myself. You might, he said, without softening it. Is that a reason not to? She looked at him. You're annoyingly consistent about that. About what? About not letting people use the possibility of failure as a reason to avoid things. She paused. You do it with Macy, too. I've watched you. She says she's not sure she can do something, and you say, maybe you can't, let's find out. It's the honest approach. It's a little terrifying from the outside. Is it working? She looked at the creek through the window, the dark water moving. Yes, she said. It's working. He drove her back to the city afterward, and she said he didn't need to come all the way in, and he said he knew he didn't have to, and he drove her to her building, and they sat in the truck in the parking structure for a moment, and the air between them had the particular quality of things that had been building toward something specific and were arriving. I've been thinking about something, he said. Tell me. The board at your place, the photographs. He looked at her. You have 6 of them up. The grain elevator, the park shots, a few others. And I keep thinking about the one of the fountain basin, the one with the leaf accumulation against the drain. He paused. There's something in the framing of that one, the way you found the geometry in something that wasn't supposed to be geometric. He shook his head slightly. That's a real photograph, Victoria. She was very still. I'm not saying that to be encouraging, he said. I'm saying it because it's true, and because you should hear it from someone who isn't 26 and enthusiastic about everything. She looked at the windshield for a moment. He could see the thing moving through her. Not performance, just the genuine response of a person receiving something they'd been managing not to want too much. Thank you, she said. Simply. You should call the gallery. I'll call the gallery, she said. She got out of the truck and turned back at the door. The parking structure fluorescent light behind her, her breath visible in the December cold. This was a real date, she said. Yeah, he said. It was. She looked at him a moment, then nodded once and went inside. He drove the 40 minutes home with the windows cracked and the radio off and thought about the walnut slab waiting in the workshop and thought about where things were going and felt, for the first time in a long time, that the direction was right. The second date happened 2 weeks later. This one was her planning it, and she took him to an opening at the museum in the city. Contemporary photography, a retrospective for a woman photographer in her 70s whose work had come back into fashion. It was not the kind of event Landon attended with regularity. He wore the good jacket. He stood next to Victoria in the gallery's white rooms while she talked about the work with a precision and passion he'd never heard from her outside of a conversation about the company, and he realized that the two things, the work she ran and the work she loved, were exactly the same size inside her. She'd just only been feeding one of them. He told her that, standing in front of a large format photograph of a highway overpass in early morning light. She turned and looked at him. Say that again. He did. She was quiet for a moment, then, I think you're right. A pause. I think I've known that and not let myself say it. You should let yourself say it. She looked at the photograph. The balance of light in this one, she said, not changing the subject, just continuing it in a different direction. She shot it at the exact moment before the sun clears the overpass. 2 minutes earlier or later, and it's a different photograph. She paused. That's what I was doing in the park that morning, looking for those 2 minutes. Did you find them? Some of them, she said. I'm still learning how to be still long enough. She looked at him. That's not a metaphor. That's literally the technical problem. I believe you, he said. It's also a metaphor. The corner of her mouth moved. Don't get clever. Too late, he said, and she laughed, the real one, and the woman next to them looked over briefly and went back to looking at the photograph. It was after the museum that Richard Sterling appeared, which was the kind of timing that made the universe seem like it had a particular sense of humor. They were on the sidewalk outside, walking toward the parking structure, and a voice behind them said Victoria's name. She stopped and turned, and there he was. Richard Sterling, 63, still looking like the man Landon had met twice at Sterling family occasions, silver-haired, well-dressed, a woman beside him who must have been the new wife. Richard, Victoria said. Her voice shifted. Not cold, not warm, just professionally neutral, the tone she used for people she had history with and no current feeling about. I didn't know you were coming tonight, Richard said. He looked at Landon, and there was a half-second of recognition that Landon watched travel across the man's face. This is Landon Pierce, Landon said, and offered his hand. Nice to see you again. Richard shook it. His eyes went to Victoria. Something moved in them that wasn't quite accusation and wasn't quite confusion, but was in that general territory. This is Claire, Richard said, indicating the woman beside him. Claire smiled pleasantly and said hello, and Landon said hello back. I'm glad you came tonight, Victoria said. It's a good show. She was already slightly turned to go, the kind of body language that closed a conversation without being rude about it. Victoria, Richard said. Can I call you this week? There's something I've been meaning. You can email me, she said. I'll respond faster to email. She smiled at Claire. It was nice to meet you. And then, to Landon, quietly. Ready? Ready, he said. They walked to the parking structure. He could feel the residue of the encounter in the air between them. Are you okay? He asked. Completely fine, she said. Which was true. He could tell it was true, but there was a minor tension in her jaw that suggested she was processing. He seemed surprised, Landon said. Richard is always surprised when I do something that doesn't fit the story he has about me. She paused. He spent 23 years thinking he understood me. He didn't. I didn't help him understand me because I wasn't being honest with myself, so I don't hold it against him. But I'm also not available for his ongoing revision of his opinion. She paused. He'll email me something careful and well-intentioned, and I'll respond briefly, and that will be that. What do you think he'll say? She considered. Probably that he hopes I know what I'm doing. Maybe something about Kara. A pause. He means well. He just processes the world by managing it. Landon looked at her. Like you used to. She glanced at him sideways. You're on a roll tonight. I'm observant. You're occasionally irritating about it. Fair, he said. She stopped at her car and turned. The parking structure was quiet around them. The other gallery goers dispersed. The city muffled up above. What he'll mean, if he calls, she said, is that he thinks this is impulsive. That I'm reacting to something. The age difference, Kara. The history. He'll think I'm not thinking it through. She paused. What I want you to know is that I've thought about it more carefully than I've thought about most of the major decisions in my life, including the ones I'm professionally known for. He looked at her. I know that, he said. You don't have to convince me. I'm not trying to convince you, she said. I want to say it out loud, because I spent too long not saying things. She looked at him. I know what this is. I know what I want it to be. I'm not confused about it. Neither am I, he said. They looked at each other in the parking structure light, and it was not the most romantic setting in the world, and neither of them was performing romance, and it was still the most honest moment they'd had, which was, Landon thought, probably exactly right. Good night, she said. Good night, he said. 3 days later, Richard Sterling called Landon's cell phone. Landon was in the workshop when it came through, an unknown number, and he answered with the wariness he always had for unknown numbers since the supplier incident in October. Landon, Richard said. Richard Sterling, I hope this isn't… How did you get this number? Landon asked, not hostile, just direct. A pause. I have resources. I apologize if… What do you want, Richard? Another pause, briefer. Richard was a man who was used to controlling the pace of conversations, and Landon declining to observe that pace was registering as interference. I want to talk about Victoria, Richard said. Then you should talk to Victoria. I'm talking to you. I know, Landon said. I'm saying you're calling the wrong person. Landon. Richard's voice went through a gear change, but less formal, more something that was trying to be man-to-man. We both care about her. I know that sounds… With respect, you don't know what I care about or how. I know you were engaged to my daughter. I know that too. And now you're… Richard. Landon set down the tool he was holding and leaned against the workbench. He wasn't angry, he was just clear. I'm going to be honest with you because I think you're probably used to people not being that way with you. What's happening between me and Victoria is between me and Victoria. You don't have standing in it. If you're worried about her, call her. She'll tell you the same thing. Silence. The age, Richard started, is not something either of us is confused about, Landon said. Kara and I have spoken. Victoria and Kara have spoken. That's between them. He paused. I understand why you're calling. You still think of Victoria as someone who needs a circuit breaker, someone who makes bold decisions without fully thinking them through. I'd push back on that in general, and I'd particularly push back on it here. He paused. She's one of the most thoughtful people I've been around. You might want to update your understanding of her. Another silence, longer this time. I don't mean to be an obstacle, Richard said, and his voice had changed again, the management layer gone. Just a man in his 60s who had been married to someone for 23 years and hadn't understood her, and was still, on some level, working through what that meant. I know, Landon said. His voice was not unkind. That's why I'm being straight with you instead of just ending the call. Richard was quiet for a moment. Take care of her, he said finally. She doesn't need me to take care of her, Landon said. She's capable of that herself. But yes, we take care of each other. He ended the call and stood in the workshop for a minute, feeling the grain of the walnut slab under his palm the way he always did when something had happened that needed processing. He didn't tell Victoria about the call that day. He told her the following Saturday when she came to the house and he was working on the slab, and Macy was somewhere upstairs with her beetle book, and the workshop smelled of sawdust and the stove was going. She listened to the whole account. He told it plainly, no editorializing. When he was done, she looked at the slab on the sawhorses for a moment. What did you say about her being capable of taking care of herself? Exactly that. She was quiet. And what did he say? He said, take care of her. And I said she's capable of that herself, and that we take care of each other. She looked at him then with an expression he was starting to be able to read. Not the composed professional face, not the guarded one, but the third one underneath both of those. The one that was just her, that had taken him a while to earn regular access to. You said we, she said. I did, he said. She didn't make it into anything. She just absorbed it and filed it in whatever place she was building to hold the future. And then she looked at the walnut slab and said, how's it coming? Good, he said. Look at this. He moved around the slab and pointed to a section where the grain curved around a former branch junction, a dark swirl in the heartwood. That's going to be the center of the table. I'm designing the whole piece around it. She came around and looked at it from his angle. She was close enough that he could smell the particular combination of her shampoo and the cold outside air she'd brought in with her, and he was aware of it the way he was aware of a lot of things about her now. Not disruptive, just present, like a note in a piece of music you hadn't noticed the first time through and now couldn't unhear. The grain goes in 4 directions from that point, she said. Yeah, it's a natural center. You don't fight that. You design around it. That's what good photographers do too, she said. Find the natural center of a frame and design around it instead of imposing one. She paused. I've been doing that more, finding the center instead of deciding where it is beforehand. Is it working? Yes, she said. I've got 22 frames I think are serious. A pause. I called the gallery. He looked at her. And? And the owner wants to see the work in January. She's not promising anything. She said she needs to see the full set before she decides if it fits their program. Victoria's voice was even. She's known for being difficult to get into. Good, he said. Good that she's difficult? Good that you called. Good that you're doing it. He looked at the slab. The rest is just outcome. You can't control outcome. I know, she said. I'm better at accepting that than I used to be. A pause. Marginally. He smiled. She saw it, and her own face did the thing it did. That small private shift at the corner of the mouth that was hers alone. Macy appeared in this workshop doorway in her socks, which meant she'd come downstairs without being called, which meant she'd heard Victoria's car in the driveway, which was a thing she'd started doing, listening for it. You're here, Macy said, with the directness of someone who didn't see any point in dressing up a fact. I'm here, Victoria said. Dad said you might teach me how to take pictures. Landon had said no such thing. He looked at his daughter with the patient expression of a man accustomed to being volunteered for things. I might, Victoria said without missing a beat. Do you have any cameras? Dad has a phone. We can work with that. Victoria looked at her with the particular quality of attention she brought to Macy. Fully present, no condescension. Photography is mostly about learning to look at things. The camera is just how you record what you see. Macy absorbed this. I'm good at looking at things, she said. I know, Victoria said. I've watched you on the trail. Macy considered. Then, can we do it now? Mace, Landon said. Victoria just got here. I don't mind, Victoria said. And she meant it. He could tell she meant it. And something in the quality of that, her not minding, her actually wanting to, settled in his chest with a warmth that he was done pretending wasn't there. He went back to the walnut slab. Through the workshop window he could hear them in the yard. Macy's running commentary, Victoria's quieter responses, and then silences that meant they were both looking at something the same way. He worked the slab, reading the grain, planning the cuts, thinking about joints and proportion, and the relationship between the natural edge and the finished surface. The work required everything and nothing simultaneously. The way good work did, the kind you'd done long enough to do with your whole body and a part of your mind free to think. He thought about Richard Sterling on the phone, the something not quite right in his voice that had more to do with regret than with concern. A man who'd had something and managed it at arm's length for 23 years and then lost it and was still trying to understand what he'd had. He thought about the walnut slab and the grain going in 4 directions from the natural center. He thought about Macy in the yard teaching herself to look at things through a phone camera because a woman she'd known for 6 weeks had said photography was about learning to see. Outside, Macy laughed at something. Then Victoria's voice, lower, saying something Landon couldn't quite make out. Then Macy again, rapid and bright, the way she talked when she was fully lit up about something. He ran his hand along the walnut slab. 8 feet long. Room for 6 people. Easy. 8 if you pulled the chairs in. He picked up the marking pencil and began laying out the first cut. That evening, after dinner, after Macy had gone to bed and the workshop stove had been banked for the night, Landon and Victoria sat at the kitchen table with the remains of the wine and the lamp on and the December dark outside. She showed him the photographs on her camera. The full set of 22 she considered serious. He looked at each one. He didn't hurry. He could feel her watching him and not watching him, the careful nonchalance of someone who cared about the response and was managing not to show how much. He went through them twice. Then he set the camera on the table. The park series is the strongest, he said. Specifically, the 3 that center on the fountain basin and the 2 with the old man feeding pigeons. Those 5 are the core of what you have. He paused. The grain elevator is good, but it's slightly separate in tone from the others. It belongs in the set, but not at the center. He looked at her. And the one of the Bear Branch crossing, the one against the flat sky, that one isn't finished yet. I don't mean technically. I mean, you started something there that has a part 2 you haven't shot yet. She looked at him. How do you know? Because when I look at it, I feel like I'm waiting for something and it doesn't arrive. He paused. That's not a flaw. That might be the most interesting one in the set when you find the second frame. He paused. What were you thinking about when you shot it? She was quiet for a moment. About branches being how trees test their reach, she said. How far they can extend before the weight becomes more than the structure can hold. She paused. I was thinking about the difference between extending and overextending, and how you only know which one you're doing after the fact. He looked at her. She looked back. Yeah, he said. That needs a second frame. She looked at the camera on the table between them. Then she looked at him with the third face, the one underneath, the one that was just her. I'm not overextending, she said quietly. Just so you know. I've thought about it, and I know the difference. I know you do, he said, and I know you have concerns, legitimate ones, about Macy, about the pace of things, about whether this is real or whether it's Victoria. He said it quietly. I know it's real. I've known for a while. He paused. I'm a careful person. That's not doubt. That's just how I'm built. I know how you're built, she said, and there was something in it, not possessive, just certain, the certainty of a person who had been paying attention. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She looked at their hands for a moment, then she turned hers over and held on. Outside, the December dark pressed against the windows, and the wood stove ticked as it cooled, and upstairs, Macy was asleep with her Beetle book probably open on the pillow the way she always left it. Inside, 2 people sat at a kitchen table and held on, and didn't need to say anything else that night, because sometimes the thing that's true doesn't require words to be real. The walnut slab was in the workshop waiting. Someday it was going to be a table. He already knew who it was for. The walnut table was finished on the last Friday of February. Landon had been working it for 3 months, which was longer than any single piece he'd built in the past 4 years, not because it was technically complex, though it was, but because he kept stopping, not from doubt, from the particular kind of care that makes you set something down and walk away for a day, not to avoid it, but to come back with better eyes. He'd done that 6 times over the course of the winter, walking out of the workshop and leaving the slab on the sawhorses, and going inside to make dinner or help Macy with her homework, or just sit in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and the dark outside, letting the work rest until he was certain about the next decision. The result was the best thing he'd ever built. He knew it the way he always knew. Not from pride, but from the particular quiet that settled in him when something was right. The natural edges had been treated and sealed. The grain center he'd designed around became exactly what he'd seen in it from the beginning. The legs were tapered hardwood, the joinery was clean and tight, and would hold for 50 years without complaint. The surface had been oiled 3 times and had come up dark and warm and alive. He stood in the workshop that Friday morning and looked at it for a long time. Then he called Victoria. "It's done," he said. She was in a meeting. He could tell from the quality of the background silence, the particular compressed quiet of a room full of people who had just stopped talking. She said, "Excuse me a moment," and then her voice changed, the acoustic shift of someone stepping into a hallway. "I'll come Saturday," she said. "Macy wants to be there when you see it." "Then I'll be there Saturday morning," she said. She came at 9. Macy met her at the door in her socks and pulled her by the hand through the house and into the workshop with the urgency of someone who had been waiting and was done with it. Landon was leaning against the far wall with his coffee, watching. Victoria walked in and stopped. She stood in front of the table and didn't say anything for almost a full minute. He watched her look at it. Not the quick approving look of someone being polite, but the real look, the one that started at the grain center and traveled outward, that took in the natural edge and the joinery and the way the legs related to the surface. The photographer's look, the one that read what was in front of it. "Landon," she said finally. "Yeah," he said. "This is—" She stopped. She put her hand flat on the surface, and he watched her feel the grain. The way he felt grain, the way people did when they understood what wood was, and something in his chest did the thing it did when she was in his workshop, the specific warmth of having the right person in the right place. "It's beautiful," she said. The word came out plain and real, not performed. "It's genuinely beautiful." "It took a while," he said. "The good ones do." She looked up at him. "Where is it going?" He looked at her steadily. "I think you know where it's going." She held his gaze. The workshop was quiet around them, cold February light through the windows, the smell of oil and sawdust and the faint wood smoke from the stove. Macy, who had been watching this exchange with the sharp attention of a child who understood more than adults generally assumed, said, "It's going in the dining room." "We don't have a dining room," Victoria said. "We will," Macy said, with the certainty of someone reporting a known fact, and then went back inside for breakfast, leaving the 2 adults standing in the workshop with the statement she'd just made settling around them like sawdust after a cut. Victoria looked at Landon. He looked back at her. "She's not wrong," he said. "No," Victoria said quietly. "She's not." That was how it was named, finally. Not in a significant conversation, not with speeches or formal declarations, but by a 6-year-old in her socks walking away like it was already settled. Which, Landon had come to understand, was how the real things usually got decided. Not in the moments you planned for them, but in the ones you didn't. The gallery showing was in March. The owner, a woman named Dana Faraday, who had been running the Faraday Gallery for 16 years and had a reputation for being harder to impress than a federal judge, had looked at Victoria's full set in January and taken 3 days to respond. Her email, when it came, was 4 sentences. "The park series is cohesive and serious. The fountain basin sequence in particular has a quality of attention I don't see often. I'd like to offer you a group showing in March. 4 photographers, 8 to 10 pieces each. Let me know by Friday." Victoria had read it standing at her kitchen counter and then sat down, which was not something she did mid-morning on a workday. She'd shown up at Landon's that Saturday with the email pulled up on her phone and handed it to him without saying anything. He read it, handed it back. "Call her," he said. "I already did," she said. "I called her Thursday." He looked at her. "You were going to tell me this Saturday?" "I was still—" She stopped. "I needed a few days to believe it was real." He understood that. He didn't push. The showing was the 2nd Saturday in March. Landon arranged for Macy to stay with Marcus for the afternoon, which Marcus agreed to without asking a single question because Marcus understood the situation and had an opinion about it that he delivered once, plainly, over fishing gear in October. "She sounds like someone worth the complication." Then he'd gone back to his tackle box and hadn't mentioned it again, which was exactly why they were friends. Landon drove into the city and picked up Victoria from the condo. She was ready when he arrived, which she always was, and she was wearing a dress he hadn't seen before. Dark blue, good. And she had the camera bag over her shoulder out of habit, and he pointed at it and she laughed and left it by the door. They walked into the gallery together. Her photographs were on the east wall, 8 of them, printed large, framed simply. The park series at the center, as he'd suggested, the grain elevator to the left, 2 others on the right that he hadn't seen yet, newer work she'd shot in January and February that she'd been quietly developing without showing him, saving it for this. He walked to the wall and looked at them. The new one stopped him. One was the workshop. She'd shot it without his knowledge, or rather, with his knowledge and not his attention, which was a different thing. He'd been working at the bench, and she'd come in and he'd heard the shutter click once, but hadn't thought anything of it. What she'd captured was the workbench in the mid-morning light, his hands on the walnut slab, the grain visible and his hands reading it, both of them, the man and the wood, in the same quality of concentration. It was, he realized looking at it on the gallery wall, a photograph of what it meant to pay attention to something you loved. He stood in front of it for a long time. "When did you shoot this?" he asked. "January, the morning after the ice storm." She was beside him, looking at it with him. "You were so focused you didn't even notice." "I noticed," he said. "I just didn't think—" He paused. "I didn't know what you were doing." "I wasn't sure either," she said. "Not until I saw it developed." "Victoria." He looked at her. "This is the best one." She was quiet for a second. "Dana thought so too. She put it at the center of the arrangement and then moved it when I asked her to." "Why did you move it?" She looked at the wall. "Because I didn't want to make the show about you. It's about the looking, the act of it." She paused. "You're in it, but you're not the subject." He looked back at the photograph, his hands on the grain, the light from the window doing something exact and unrepeatable to the surface of the wood. "What is the subject?" he asked. "Attention," she said. "What it looks like when someone is fully present with something they care about." She paused. "I've been studying that this year. What presence looks like. What it looks like on a face, in a body, in a pair of hands." She was quiet for a moment. "I had a lot of catching up to do." People moved through the gallery around them. Dana Faraday appeared at Victoria's elbow briefly. A compact woman in her 50s with the direct appraisal of someone who'd spent 16 years deciding what was worth looking at, and said the park series was getting the most attention and that 2 people had already asked about the fountain basin print. Victoria thanked her, and Dana moved on with the efficiency of someone who managed multiple things simultaneously and didn't need to linger. Later, a man Landon didn't know stood in front of the workshop photograph for a long time, and then found Victoria and told her that his father had been a woodworker and that the photograph looked exactly like how he remembered his father's hands at work, and the way he said it meant it was the most honest compliment the photograph was going to receive that afternoon. Victoria thanked him and meant it. On the drive back, she was quiet in the way she got when something had happened that she needed to process without talking through it. He let her have that. They were 40 minutes out of the city before she said anything. "I forgot what it felt like," she said. "What did?" "Making something real." She looked at the road. "The company is real and it matters, and I'm good at it. But it's not. It doesn't feel like those photographs feel. When I look at those photographs, I know they came from me. Specifically, me. Nobody else makes those exact frames." She paused. "The company could be run by a competent person who wasn't me. The photographs couldn't." "That's true," he said. "I lost that for a long time." She looked at the window. "I think I lost it around the time I sold the first company. I packed up the camera and I told myself there wasn't time, and eventually I stopped checking whether there was time." She paused. "I don't want to do that again." "You won't," he said. "You don't know that." "I do," he said, "because now you know what it costs." She turned and looked at him. "That's not a guarantee." "No, it's a reason." He glanced at her. "You're not the same person who packed up the camera. You know the difference now." She was quiet for a moment, then, "You're doing the thing again." "What thing?" "The thing where you say something true in a way that makes argument feel pointless." "I just mean it," he said. "I know." She turned back to the window. "That's what makes it effective." He drove. The March dark outside was cleaner than the winter dark had been. Something slightly loosened in it. The particular quality of late winter that wasn't quite spring, but was no longer fully resigned. "I want to tell you something," Victoria said. Tell me." "I spoke to Kara last week." He waited. "She called me, not the other way around." A pause. "She said she'd been thinking, that she's been in therapy herself for a few months, which she didn't tell me directly. She said it parenthetically, the way she does when something is personal. And she said she's been working through a lot of things. The engagement, her childhood, what she called the years of trying to be something I could see." "How did that land?" he asked. "Like a punch," Victoria said simply, "because she was right. I miss so much of her, not because I didn't love her. I did. I do, desperately, but because I kept looking past her at the next thing on the list. The next meeting, the next acquisition, the next problem to manage." She paused. "She said she knows I love her. She wanted me to know she knows that. And then she said she doesn't want to stay angry." A long pause. "She said being angry at me was taking up space she needed for other things." "That's very Kara," Landon said. Victoria looked at him. She said she wants to meet, properly, not a confrontation, not a negotiation, just lunch." She paused. "She said she wants to meet the person I actually am, instead of the one she spent 30 years managing her expectations around." "Are you going to?" "We're going next Thursday," Victoria said. "There's a place near her office." He reached over without looking away from the road and put his hand over hers on her knee. She turned her hand over and held on, same as she had in December at the kitchen table, same as they did now, without remarking on it. "I don't know how it's going to go," she said. "I know," he said. "Do it anyway." "I know," she said. "I know." Lunch with Kara was on a Thursday, the kind of early spring Thursday that still had winter in it, but was trying. Victoria got there first and was sitting at the table when Kara walked in, and she watched her daughter cross the restaurant with the particular sensation of looking at something familiar that had changed slightly when you weren't paying attention. Kara looked older than she had in November, not badly older, but more settled in herself, the way people looked when they'd done some work and it was starting to show. She sat down. They looked at each other for a moment. "You look different," Kara said. "I've been told that," Victoria said. "Good different." Kara picked up the menu. "Is it the photography?" "Some of it. And some of it is him." Victoria looked at her daughter. "Yes," she said. "Some of it is him." Kara looked at the menu for a moment. Then she set it down and looked at her mother directly. "I'm not going to tell you I'm completely okay with it," she said, "because I'm not. I still have moments where it feels strange, and I don't entirely know how to hold it." She paused. "But I don't think I have the right to ask you to give it up. And I don't think it would help anything if I did." "No," Victoria said. "It wouldn't." "He's a good person," Kara said, and it cost her something to say it. Victoria could see that, the slight effort of fairness over feeling. "He was always a good person. I knew that when I ended it. I needed to end it, and he was the easier person to be honest with about that than you were." "I know," Victoria said. "I want you to know I don't regret ending it," Kara said. "I need you to know that. It wasn't about you, ultimately. It was about me knowing it wasn't right. We would have made each other miserable in a quiet way." She paused. "He deserved better than quiet misery, and so did I." "You both did," Victoria agreed. Kara was quiet for a moment. "Dana Faraday called me," she said. "She knows me through a mutual friend. She told me about the showing. She said the workshop photograph is the best work she's seen from a first-time exhibitor in years." She looked at her mother. "She wasn't calling to gossip. She was calling because she thought I should know." Victoria was still. "I didn't know she knew you." "Small city," Kara said. She paused. "I looked up the photograph online. Dana had posted a few shots from the showing." She paused. "I stood in my apartment and looked at it for a long time." She looked at the table. "He was so concentrated. His hands were just—" She stopped. "You see him, Mom. You really see him." "Yes," Victoria said quietly. "I do." "That's what I wanted," Kara said, and her voice was even, but underneath it was something old and tired and honest. That's what I always wanted from you, to be seen like that. She looked up. I'm not saying that to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I'm trying to say true things now. She paused. I think I wanted that and couldn't have it, and he was someone who reminded me of what it felt like to be seen, and I loved him partly for that, and then I resented you for… She stopped. It's complicated. It's complicated, Victoria agreed, and I'm sorry, not as a performance. I'm sorry because I see it now and I can't undo it, but I can do something different going forward. Kara looked at her. I know, she said. I think that's why I called. They ate lunch. It wasn't easy. There were moments where the conversation hit something and had to go around it, and there was one stretch of maybe 10 minutes where they talked about a mutual acquaintance just to be talking about something that wasn't them. And that was fine too, because that was how real things worked. Not smooth, not resolved in one sitting, just incrementally less defended. At the end, standing outside the restaurant, Kara said, Will you bring him sometime? Not soon, but sometime. When you're ready, Victoria said. I'll let you know when that is, Kara said. And then, because she was Kara and had a particular quality of directness she'd gotten from her mother. He's good for you, I can see it in the photograph. You're different when you're with someone you don't have to manage yourself for. She paused. I think you're happy. Actually happy. She said it like she was confirming a surprising fact. I wanted to say that. Victoria looked at her daughter in the early spring light. Thank you, she said, for coming. Thank you for being someone worth coming back to, Kara said, and hugged her briefly, the way they'd always hugged. Not long, not florid, just real. And then went back to her office. Victoria stood on the sidewalk for a long minute. Then she took out her phone and texted Landon. It went well. She wants to meet you eventually. And she said, You're good for me. She was quiet for a moment and then added, She's right. His reply came while she was still standing there. I know. You're good for me too. Saturday? She typed back, Saturday. She put her phone away and stood in the March afternoon and breathed. The thing about second chances, and she'd thought about this, had been thinking about it all winter in the early mornings when she was out with the camera and the city was still quiet, and she was learning to be still enough to find what was there. The thing about them was that they weren't really second chances at all. That was the wrong frame. A second chance implied you were going back to something, correcting a mistake, retrying a thing that had failed. But that wasn't what this was. This was a first time at a different thing. She was 50 years old. She had built companies and ended a marriage and raised a daughter imperfectly and put her camera in a storage unit for years and come out the other side of all of it with a clear understanding of what she actually was underneath everything she'd built on top of it. That wasn't a second chance. That was just what happened if you were honest long enough about what hadn't worked and patient enough to let the next thing be what it was instead of what you'd already decided it should be. She'd knocked on a door in the rain in October. He'd opened it without precondition. That was the whole of it, really. Everything else was just what grew from there. She put her camera bag over her shoulder and walked to the parking garage and drove back to the condo, and that afternoon she edited photographs for 3 hours with the particular focused contentment of a person doing exactly what they should be doing, and she didn't check her work email once. The Saturday he'd asked her about was the last Saturday in March, and it was the one she moved into the house on the Old County Road. Not dramatically, not all at once. The condo was still technically hers for 2 more months while the lease ran out, and she had things in storage and things that needed to be relocated and logistics that were logistics. But on that Saturday, she brought the boxes that mattered. The camera equipment, the prints she'd pinned to the corkboard, books, clothes, the things that were daily and necessary. And Landon had cleared the big bedroom closet and built 2 new shelves in it with leftover workshop walnut, which she'd noticed and hadn't commented on because some things you just received without making them into a moment. Macy helped carry boxes from the car with the enthusiasm of a small person given a meaningful task. She directed the placement of the corkboard with the seriousness of a curator. When the photographs were up on the guest room wall, which was no longer the guest room, she stood back and looked at them with her arms crossed, which was a gesture she'd gotten from her father. The workshop one is the best, she announced. I know, Victoria said. Because of Dad's hands, Macy said. His hands look like they're listening. Victoria looked at the photograph on the wall, then she looked at Macy. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly right." Landon appeared in the doorway. He looked at the room, the boxes in various stages of unpacked, the photographs on the wall, the camera bag on the chair, the general productive disorder of a life being relocated, and his expression did the thing it did when he was feeling something he wasn't going to make a speech about. "Dinner in 40 minutes, he said. "Macy's on garlic bread." "I know what I'm doing," Macy said, already heading for the door. Victoria looked at Landon. He looked at her. The room was imperfect and half unpacked and not the condo and not the composed professional life she'd been running for 20 years, and the walnut table downstairs was already the center of things, the way the grain center was the center of the table, and none of it was smooth and none of it was what she'd planned, and all of it was exactly right. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said, and meant it entirely. He nodded once and went back to the kitchen, and she turned to the nearest box and started unpacking. And outside, the March afternoon was doing that thing it did toward the end of the month, the light going longer and warmer, the particular quality of it that meant something was finally, actually, turning. This is what no one tells you about the lives you build in your 50s and your 30s, and whatever decade you finally stop waiting for conditions to improve before you begin. The timing is never right. There is no right time. There's only the knock on the door and what you do when you open it. Landon Pierce opened his door in October to a woman who was broken and wet and 50 years old and complicated, and he didn't close it because he was a man who understood that the best things were built from what was actually in front of you, not from what you wished you'd been given. Victoria Sterling knocked on a stranger's door. No, not a stranger's. She knew perfectly well whose door she was knocking on. That was the point. That was the whole terrifying, honest point. And didn't walk away. Because she was a woman who had spent decades managing her truth into a smaller and smaller box and had finally run out of room. Macy Pierce told a woman she'd known for 6 weeks that they would have a dining room someday, said it plainly, like a known fact. Because children who grow up in houses where the true things are said develop an instinct for truth that adults spend years trying to unlearn. None of them had done it cleanly. Victoria had carried something unspoken for years. Landon had held himself at a careful distance from his own feelings for long enough that acknowledging them had taken real effort. Kara had ended a relationship partly for the right reasons and spent years making it entirely the wrong ones, which was a very human thing to do. Richard had called when he had no standing to call, out of the particular confusion of a man who'd had something real and managed it into nothing and still wasn't entirely sure how. People were messy. Families, the ones you were born into and the ones you chose, and the ones that formed when you weren't paying attention to the fact that that was what was forming, were messier still. But the table was in the dining room. The photographs were on the wall. The camera was on the shelf and would go out again in the morning. And in the kitchen, a 6-year-old was supervising garlic bread with the gravity of someone managing a critical operation, and the man at the stove was listening to her with the full attention he brought to everything he cared about. And a woman stood in an imperfectly unpacked room in a house on a county road and felt, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, that she was in exactly the right place. Not because it was perfect, because it was true. That was enough. That had always been enough. Some people just took longer to believe it.